It's not enough to say the economy's performing well. Ireland's the fastest growing economy in Europe last year, for example. That's not enough. It's now this sort of intertwining of economic progress, social progress, environmental progress. These are the things that we have to look through different lenses.
The Architects of Business on JOE, in partnership with the EY Entrepreneur of the Year programme, telling the inspirational stories behind Ireland's most successful entrepreneurs.
Hello and welcome back to Architects of Business on JOE, made in partnership with EY Entrepreneur of the Year, where we hear the inspirational stories of some of Ireland's most successful entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Sonya Lennon, and today it's our second panel discussion of the season. I'm joined by Eleanor Chambers, CEO of NextGen Power, and Neil Gibson, EY's Chief Economist, to discuss the dreaded Brexit and what it means for Irish business. Eleanor and Neil, we're here to talk about Brexit. Yay! So exciting. Yay! But you have both got very specific takes on the situation that we're in, how to get through it from a business point of view, from a social point of view, from an economic point of view. Neil, you're Chief Economist with EY. I suppose the big thing that people want to know is, what are the likely scenarios? What's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario?
Yes, unfortunately, I mean, as we record this, we're just over a month away, and still we're not sure what form of exit the UK might go through, and that makes it very difficult because you have to scenario plan. You have to be saying as a business, okay, let's say there's a no deal, so Britain leaves the EU, doesn't have a deal, the so-called no deal or hard Brexit. What would that mean for my business? So you need to think that through, plan that. But equally, you can see the reluctance of firms to put much resource into that because we've had delays before. We can't even be certain that that's the direction we're going to go.
We've had U-turns before, we've had all sorts of stuff.
Almost everything's still on the table. But it's always good to prepare to know what the worst case would be. So certainly for the island of Ireland, a no deal would be quite challenging. So that would bring in tariffs for certain industries. It would certainly make the currency, the exchange rate between sterling and euro, very volatile for a period of time. And it would make a number of industries, in particular businesses, find trading conditions change overnight.
And I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? That not all business is equal, not all situations are equal. So it's very much a contextual response to these potential situations.
Absolutely. So you must know your own business, of course, but you need to know the business of your competitors, of your suppliers. Would they be affected? Would that materially impact you, even if you're not feeling the direct impact? So the sort of tips for business are: make sure you know what currency changes mean. Know if you would be exposed to any tariffs on the goods or services that you provide, and know whether your suppliers would be impacted accordingly. There are other long-term implications, but in terms of day one preparation, currency, tariffs, and a little bit about sort of regulations or laws. Know your supply chain very well, know your competitors. But of course, in any period of disruption, and it may seem strange to say this, but anything that disrupts trade will present other opportunities. So you may find one of your competitors more severely impacted than yourself. You may find that, a competitor on, say in Northern Ireland, it might be a competitor in the Republic of Ireland or vice versa, who can no longer supply to the GB market competitively. That might give you an edge. So it's always been able to see, even in the toughest of times, could there be an advantage for me in this particular window? I think one thing it's important to say is, it will settle down. However tough Brexit looks, no matter what outcome we have, fundamentally economies perform based on the talent of their people, the innovation, the infrastructure, the education system, the governance, the rule of law. Both economies will continue to perform. It just could be a very volatile.
No choice, right?
You can't do anything else.
It'll keep on trucking regardless of what happens.
We could have a very volatile period. We may need to have some forbearance on the banks, or a little bit of leeway, or a little bit of government intervention. But in the long run, the businesses will perform, or the two economies will survive and continue to grow. So sometimes you have to think both the short-term impacts, can I prepare for those, can I be ready for them, but also think long-term, what's my product, what's my service? Brexit's only one of the changes that's going to come along. Keep almost staying true to your mission. What do I produce, for whom, at what price? Focus on that, know what the implications might be. And I think very important to say, there is a growing support network out there, whether it's IBEC, Chambers of Commerce, Intertrade Ireland, Invest NI. Know that you've got a phone number, you know that who you can pick up, look through their little checklists, and also have that contact that if something comes up you weren't expecting, you know who to pick the phone up. So do a bit of preparation, that even if you're not putting a lot of resource in now, you know immediately who you can pick up the phone to give you a bit of help through it.
And Eleanor, you're almost the perfect storm in terms of the work that you're doing in the south and in the north. So you're kind of seeing it from all angles. And, you know, myself and Neil were talking about this earlier, that entrepreneurs, by their very nature, have this kind of baked-in agility. So you're almost expecting change. How do you begin to plan for those various scenarios across the span of your businesses?
Well, let me roll back first. I can remember pre-Euro when I had to import goods within Europe using different currencies. I can remember importing goods from the US, so I know what it's like to pay tariffs and manage paying either freight on board or
and you're still here.
Credit.
You look old enough to remember all that.
Oh, jeez, thanks, Neil.
This interview is going to be brilliant now. Everybody's happy.
You know, I remember all of that stuff, and I'm not saying I'm really looking forward to coming back, and it was a bit of a pain in the neck, but you know what, you got on with it. And you're talking about the nature of entrepreneurs. The nature of entrepreneurs is you see opportunity where everybody else sees problems. And I suppose that's why we do what we do. I call entrepreneurship the last safe haven for the lunatics, because you can actually get away with doing exactly what you want and call it business.
That's kind of beautiful, isn't it?
A divided Europe worries me a lot more as a principle than Brexit does, and then all of the awkwardness and difficulties that are going to come. And Neil is quite right. Purely from a business perspective, look, change is what happens all the time. And if you expect change not to happen, well, just stay in bed and don't get up. And even then, the roof could fall in. Who knows?
I know, indeed. And we will talk a little bit more about the future of Europe, but I think if we go there right now, we may not be primed and ready. So let's hold on to that one for a minute. What are the potential positive outcomes for you as a business owner?
Well, the business and you have to remember, my current business is very new. And I was saying actually to Neil earlier, what I have done is I've actually registered the business in Northern Ireland, but I've also registered the same company in Southern Ireland. And I will decide as things unfold, which will be my major place of operation.
But that's a fantastic piece of advice for anybody in that situation where they're straddling the border. You know, something so simple, but with so much foresight, that could make the difference between everything that happens between now and there.
Well, to me, that was just logical.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll see how it pans out. And I really think we want to see what's going to happen, because we've been on sort of hold for too long. But I'm really positive about our community of entrepreneurs, because whatever adversity is, everybody gets through it. And Brexit, actually, for some of the things that I've been through in my business life, Brexit isn't insurmountable. It's not pleasant. It was unnecessary, but it's coming down the track, and I'm sure we'll all cope.
It was unnecessary, and yet it blindsided us. Why was it such a surprise?
Well, you mentioned what good or what positives there might be. And if there's anything I would like to, I mean, Brexit as a vote that came as such a surprise should really ask some challenging questions of my profession, of economics, of commentators and how they understand how satisfied the public are with economic performance. And I think one of the positives, if we can put it that way, that could come out of this is a time to reflect and say, well, what do we really consider to be success for an economy or for a society? And it's clearly more than just economic growth now. It's not enough to say the economy's performing well. Ireland's the fastest growing economy in Europe last year, for example. That's not enough. It's now this sort of intertwining of economic progress, social progress, environmental progress. These are the things that we have to look through different lenses to judge whether our society is performing as well as we would like. And there is a similar change in business mindsets too, starting to think about beyond the P&L, beyond shareholder value. So that's very important. But there are other things. What society am I contributing? What way am I contributing to the local community, to society? What is my environmental impact? That's what workers, that's what citizens are demanding. And I think we're reaching a point across the island, actually, that there is a recognition how important our public services are, whether they're provided by the public service or private, but our healthcare, our education, our transport infrastructure, our environmental footprint that we're creating, our communities, who's being left behind. These things are now, Brexit's brought them into sharper focus, that we have to have a better think at, okay, what does success look like? It's not enough to be growing.
And I think that is the problem, you know, with the second fastest growing economy in Europe, and yet record numbers of suicide, homelessness, obesity, like critical social issues. And in a way, when, you know, history has shown us that we look back 100 years and go, they did it like that. You really have a strong sense that in 100 years' time, people will look back at how we're only beginning to wrap our heads around the enmeshing of economy and society. And they'll be thinking, I can't believe it took them so long.
Yeah, there's a model that has been there, I suppose, for 30 years plus. And it's all about, and I would have been known to quote it, you know, success is paper thin, it's called a balance sheet. I no longer think like that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that profit isn't key, because unless you can run a profitable business, you actually can't keep going. But it's about the economics of enough. What is enough profit? And as well as that, what are the other benchmarkers that we decide is a successful business? And it is around social responsibility. It is around inclusion. And the one really close to my heart is, and this is one of the things that really bugs me about Brexit, the environmental issues that we're dealing with. They are real, and we are already late to the party to try and clean it up. And Brexit has just detracted from all of the things that are impossible, are important. And the business that I am currently in, it is around giving people, and the irony of it is, all of the technology that's needed, bar safely flying airplanes without falling out of the sky, without using fossil fuel. That's the only one, as far as I'm concerned, that we should currently be doing. We should have electric cars on the road. The equipment is there to heat your homes, run your homes using solar and battery, and there's also an electric heating system that isn't a heat pump. But that's a whole different story. But my point is,
this is baked into your mission.
This is here. It is now. It is available. It is affordable. It is doable. But we have to get away from being an I society. We must go back to being a we society. And we also all have to take personal responsibility. Otherwise, we will be the generation that didn't stand up and look after the planet for the future. And that's the other thing about Brexit, Neil. It's dividing in its thinking.
Yeah.
And we have never, as a world, needed to be one planet. Nature doesn't care if it's France, if it's Germany, if it's Ireland, if it's England. We have got to be as one how we deal with these problems.
And I think we can take from Brexit that we didn't, in this modern age of social media and new means and methods of communicating, we didn't really have a great public debate in terms of what the real evidence is and what was the real question what were people really upset about? Was this the right question? There's also been, after the vote, a very divisive argument of, for example, not trying to understand why people would vote in a different way than you might have. And I think that's a challenge to us all as well, is to spend more time trying to understand why people would hold a very different view. Because if we don't understand that, we can't really improve things, and we'll be taken by surprise again. We will have, you know, if it was, to use the old line of, you know, it's the economy, stupid. If it was only the economy, then, you know, Ireland would be, you would be struggling to see a problem, and yet you listed many of them. There's huge amounts of work to be done.
So you know, I think repeal and marriage equality are two great examples of that national discussion in a way that didn't happen in the UK around Brexit. And I suppose we are very nationalistic, you know, in a different way to the UK, and we are very proud of being Irish. There is most definitely a rise in populism, which has been responsible for Brexit, for the election of Trump. Are we in danger of falling victim to that as a small island?
You would think, I mean, it's often commented that there's a hugely cosmopolitan, very liberal, very modern thing. It would be, you've got to watch that doesn't breed a level of complacency. There are concerns around things. You mentioned the very worrying rise in sort of incidents of mental health problems, suicide rates, homelessness. There are huge social issues, not even to mention the environmental issues that Eleanor pointed to say, actually, there is still a lot of work to do. And if you really think about it, populism is very often dismissed, but actually we all have a bit of it in us. We all think about our own lives first. We think about the education for our children, our own healthcare, and
our own patch.
Yes, and ultimately populism is an outworking of that feeling at a greater scale. You know, I grew up and was trained and taught economics at a time when the benefits of world trade, openness, no borders, free movement of goods and services was becoming a smaller world. These things would no longer be a concern. Now, you know, 20 years on, I'll say generously, but 30 years on, really. We're now in a world where we're worried about the amount of cost.
Don't start spinning on us now, Neil.
I know, I've given away that now. I'm a bit embarrassed about that. But we're now worried about the cost of shipping, the environmental cost of shipping across the world. We're now worried about the fact that we've lost jobs in certain sectors to other parts of the world. So populism is not something you can dismiss out of hand. You have to understand why it exists. And it exists because we can see areas of our life, our society, our culture, not in the way that we expected that this growth would deliver. That's not to say we're going to rein back totally, but we do have to have a very important conversation about what it means to be a global and open society dealing with global problems. Because at our heart, all of us have a little bit of populism in us. We do look at our own patch. So we shouldn't be as surprised that that's become such a movement. But we need to think about, okay, well, what are the issues at the heart of that? How do we tackle them and how do we think about more global solutions to some of the problems?
Fantastic. We're going to take a short break and we're going to come back and ask the question, is it too late to start planning? And what is the future of Europe?
The Architects of Business on JOE in partnership with the EY Entrepreneur of the Year programme.
The whole argument for sustainability is almost fighting for airspace at the moment with Brexit.
Yeah.
And yet Brexit is a sort of a pimple on that bigger issue.
Absolutely.
And I suppose that's one of the things, the kind of this too will end, you know, and Brexit will find its own conclusion. And Neil, as you said, there will be wobbles and there will be trips, but eventually things will come good again. That's the nature of our cyclical society and economy. But going back to the question and bearing that in mind, what can we do now as businesses? And we have business owners listening and entrepreneurs listening who maybe don't have the insight that you showed in terms of registering north and south. And that seems, you know, common sense and logical to you. It doesn't necessarily to everybody. So what can be done now in practical terms?
Just wait to see what's coming down the track. I mean, I did a Brexit. That's difficult.
Brexit breakfast.
Yeah. That's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yes.
Way back within the first 2 months, which is 16.
Yeah.
16, yeah. And after that, I refused to do them because I saw a room full of nervous people looking towards the stage, looking for answers. And I said, I will be totally disingenuous if I take part in pretending to have answers that nobody has.
Yeah.
But we're coming towards the end of the next sprint, we'll describe it. And I will say from a positive point of view, I haven't talked to a lot of manufacturing businesses in particular. I'm also the entrepreneurial ambassador for Northern Ireland, so I tend to get involved with businesses both north and south. A lot of people have taken it as a, let's sit back and look at the things in our business that we've left alone, as in the suppliers I'm buying from in the UK, the percentage of customers I have that I'm selling to in the UK. And in a way, the 3 years has been a little bit of a
systemic
window.
reassessment.
Yes.
Yeah.
For the people who took advantage of it, who are now buying raw materials from within the EU, as opposed to always buying it from the UK, and then looking for other markets to export their goods. So maybe it was a bit of wake up and shake yourself off.
And it is the case that if you're you know doing things in business a certain way,
Yeah.
it's it's easier in one way to just keep doing them, whereas a crisis presents yourself with the opportunity to remodel what you're doing in a more efficient way.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, and Eleanor's advice is quite right there. None of the clients we've worked with have any of that due diligence or preparation work. It's never wasted. If you find out you've only one potential supplier, and that's a risk, whether Brexit was happening or not,
Absolutely.
and it's good to know that. Your currency exposure, it could be, recent spikes in oil prices. You need to know what your exposure is. So even getting the process in place as to how to think through what are the big risks. Okay, what does environmental change mean for me? What am I doing in the local community? What does Brexit mean? What does tariff wars between the US and China mean? You don't have to do a huge amount of effort, but just making sure you have that risk register up to date. It's certainly never too late to plan, and you should never hesitate to pick up the phone to one of the support agencies if you suddenly have a worry. Don't ever think it's too late to do something. The nature of entrepreneurs is, that they can shift tack very quickly if the circumstances require. When we do the EOI program as an economist, it never ceases to amaze me. The different sectors, the different places, businesses I couldn't even have imagined that are successful. And yet when you talk to the story, how much they've changed over the years due to different circumstances. So that nimbleness and agility remains important. But you should never, even if you've had a bad few weeks or the figures are down, you shouldn't be saying, well, it's Brexit, it's a tough climate. That's the wrong attitude to have.
Well,
it's
that's
to
deflecting
say,
out,
yes,
right?
and there's always something you can
Yeah.
blame. It's to say, no, I'm going to go down my list of the things that influence me today and tomorrow. I think one big change we've seen is this idea of big systemic change being a long-term thing, whether it's environment, whether it's demographic change, whether it's data analytics and automation. Those are all here now. So you can't put them off as something we'll think about at the strategy session we do once a year. It's part of your planning. It can be very simple on one page and say, I know who I'm going to ring if that's a problem. If this happens, this is how I'll switch. And of course, what much of the entrepreneur family have in their favour is, Eleanor said it right at the beginning, if they need to switch, they can. Look, many bigger organisations we may say, well, they have a bigger resource to plan, but they're also slower moving.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult for them to react to these quick changes. So that nimbleness becomes important, but it's all about the psychology and the mindset. I look at my exposure is to whatever the issue might be. I'll know what I'm going to do if it falls in a certain way, and I'll react very quickly when it happens.
And it seems like the velocity of change, and you must have seen this in your business, is such that it used to be kind of rolling, undulating peaks and troughs of change. It's now faster and shallower, and every day brings kind of new challenges, whether they're environmental, whether they're technological. You must be experiencing that.
Well, one of the things, the benefit I have of having come through 3 businesses and all in different sectors is if I look back on the journey on each business, the business plan that I put in place that I hope to deliver out on, so far so good. That has happened. But the actual journey was never as I wrote down. But at no point in the journey while it was happening did I stop and go, oh, hang on a second, on page 10, it said by month 6 I should be here. You kind of just roll with it, and it's only reflectively you look back. So that doesn't really concern me, and it doesn't concern most people who know that actually it's rigid people who can't be entrepreneurs.
It is, and I think where the vulnerability lies is in legacy businesses that have a deep history and now have to think in a very new way and change their mindset to business. And I suppose that is the difference between success or failure. Are you the big steamboat, or are you the little tugboat who can turn around on a whim? And I think all businesses need to think like that at this stage.
Yes, we've seen a number of very high-profile major employers not be able to adapt to that change and mobility. I think it is important to say, however, that there will be some who, through no fault of their own, simply the very specific sector, the location they're in, they have one customer, they only have one. So it's hard to see going through, if it is a no-deal Brexit, that there won't be some casualties along the way. So we also must...
In very clear sectors at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, we know of the worries that we have around agri-food. There's certainly concerns in some of the transportation sectors too, even around tourism. There could be some risks. Fundamentally, we have to also remain a sort of sympathy and empathy with those who maybe, for no fault of their own, can't quite adapt or move quick enough. We have to think of people who do lose their job, so in a sense, we want to embrace the ability to be entrepreneurial, to be nimble, to be quick, but also the fact that there may be some requirement of governments to step in to provide a little bit of aid or support or transition funding to help businesses through, or help communities through. It can be a very difficult time, and that's one of the great challenges for successful businesses, is to know how to demonstrate that success without being disingenuous to those who have struggled. It's a devastating thing for someone to lose their job, or for a community to lose its major employer. So there will be some disruption and difficulties. Yeah. Yes, the best businesses will be able to step and adapt and change, but there will be some casualties, and that will require a response. Other employers to pick up some of the labour and talent. I mean, employers tell us across the island their biggest issue, north or south, we have supposedly one of the UK's weaker economies and one of Europe's fastest. And yet when I operate across the island, the same issues come up all the time. Where can I get the talent I need? So even picking up talent from those, maybe looking at some interventions, that's why we're likely to see fairly conservative for the small c budgets, as governments hold back any finance to maybe step in if there are difficulties. So disruption does have its casualties, and we can't sugarcoat the fact that could be very difficult. But there will be winners. They may then get access to some talent. But as a society, we must always, I talk about figures all the time. But when that unemployment number ticks up, those are individuals, people, families, communities, and that matters. Yeah. And what we talked about earlier in this programme, it's important we think of the disruption that we might see in certain sectors and areas, and not simply dismiss it as being they weren't fast enough or nimble enough. There will be some casualties through no fault of their own.
So you're back to that... that enmeshing of the economy and society. We have to start thinking differently.
Yes, we have to change how we live completely. We have to go back to what we called fundamentals of, and I'm talking about it in a business context because that's what we're doing. What does new success look like? And I would actually describe myself now as a capitalist with a social conscience. And that's very important to me, that, when I'm by myself, on my own, that I can, with all conscience, look at myself and say, yes, you do what you do. Yes, you make money, but you do it in a bigger picture way than just looking at the bottom line.
I mean, that's been a huge change. I mean, our organisation, EY, has a tagline, building a better working world. But that feels very real to me as an economist, but it's becoming more widespread across the whole firm as you start to worry, well, the unemployment rate does matter to me. The fact that we are thinking about ways to fund our infrastructure here in Ireland, that's a question that keeps me awake at night, keeps my colleagues excited about, okay, can we think of a new funding way? Can we think of a way to pay for the infrastructure the island needs? Because we know that the government's pockets are not deep enough. But that problem is all of our problems. It's not the fact that we can say, well, the government hasn't delivered my services. Well, we need the taxes to do that. We need to think that all of those problems are society's problems. And I think that's been a real change over my professional life, is that Eleanor's journey is replicated as people are starting to think, we're in a privileged position. We could do more.
And I think it's really interesting that, big business often gets a bad rap. It isn't particularly embraced by the media. People are distrustful. Whereas actually these changes in thinking are coming from the intersection of the talent pool and the business owners. And these changes are happening moving upwards to government. Yes. And I think if the government could start to understand, well, actually, hang on, let's think about this differently, and your version of what is success, that would make a huge impact.
Well, entrepreneurs do get a bad rap. And I have to say, some of the most decent people I know and some of my best friends are entrepreneurs, because they tend to be open, they tend to be real. Now, there are bad business people, but they're never long-term business people. They're just bad business people.
Yeah.
And everything in business and everything in life is based on trust, is based on honesty,
respect.
And people buy people first. And if you can't actually deliver on those, you can't build a big business. That's logical.
So we could talk forever on all of this. We promised that we would come to the future of Europe. So part of Ireland's success is as that economic grouping in Europe. Neil, this rise in populism, political and economic upheaval across that landmass and beyond. What do you think is going to happen in the mid-future?
Well, the honest answer is that Brexit should be a wake-up call. There is much to think about in the European community. We have a very difficult social conversation around the issue of migration to really deal with. Migration is an absolute necessity for us to grow. We need different cultures, different attitudes. Businesses, societies need to embrace that, which we do by and large in Ireland. But it does bring pressure. More people means you need better infrastructure, better housing, better hospitals, more hospital beds, more school places. And one of the stories of Brexit is that we weren't providing those services in the UK quick enough. So we have to have this, coming back to this question about, well, what's a successful society? So Europe as an entity has to think about a number of things. One of them would be this social, economic and environmental intersection and how we think about that as our sort of economic or our societal goal. We need to think about what we do in a crisis next time. So the difficulties for Greece, for Portugal and here in Ireland to correct itself went through a very painful austerity period that was very damaging. Would we do that again in the next crisis? I'm not sure. Does the one size fit all, same interest rate, same exchange rate, does that work? And if it doesn't, do we have to think about transferring money in different ways?
And one of the risks, I suppose, is a kind of a twin track economy, with Germany and the rest of Europe. And how does politics meet economics, and when do market forces prevail?
Yes, it would be a huge mistake to say Brexit was a quote unquote British problem. It speaks to dissatisfaction with the economic model that we've seen, and that should be challenging us all to think about what could we do better. I mean, Ireland is a very pro-European country. It's benefited massively, but it's now going to become it's got a very important voice in the European discussions about saying, look, we do need to set a different set of goals about what a successful Europe looks at. Italy still has some economic problems. So does Greece. So does Portugal. There are more challenges to come, and it would be a mistake to say that once Brexit is out of the way that we've got past that. It's a symptom of some underlying economic, social, environmental challenges that we've all got to embrace, and Ireland will have to play its part in that.
Eleanor, we're going to wrap up very soon. Is there any sort of parting thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with?
We are at the beginning of a changing world, and I think we should look at it as opportunity, and I think we need to embrace the responsibility.
Spoken like a true entrepreneur. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us on Architects of Business, and talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to Joe's Architects of Business, made in partnership with EY Entrepreneur of the Year. Thanks to the whole team here at Maximum Studios, and of course to my guests Eleanor Chambers and Neil Gibson. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the show to get a brand new episode into your feed every fortnight for free. I'm your host, Sonya Lennon. Talk to you soon.